pieces of paper with pics on it so we don't have to kid each other just to get something to eat. It's not wrong.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means.
Slaves are mine, lives are mine, all that they own is mine. I do not know your God.
We are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness. It does not serve the world. It's about shrinking. We were all meant to shine. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same, as we are liberated from our own fear.
In one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight.
I just want you to know that I won't let you down.
Well, good evening, audience. You are on the cutting edge, and I'm your host, Daniel Holdings. Folks, we have picked up the show, dusted it off the shelf, and are about to dive into some of the extraordinary things that are happening in our world today. But before we do any of that, Dorothy Crothers, my producer. Dorothy, are you there?
I always hear Daniel.
Dorothy, you sure are there. Many of you know that Dorothy produces various shows, Augusto Perez, The Edge Portal with Larry Taylor. Now she has a couple of other shows. Dorothy, what are the other news shows? You got two other news shows that are coming on. What are those shows?
I've got Healing River with Deborah Lemke, MD, talking about the spiritual aspects of physical healings and side effects of medications. And this Saturday is the debut episode for Benjamin Baruch.
And what is
Benjamin's going to be doing Searching the Scriptures. So Benjamin has such a unique outlook, you know, because he knows the Hebrew and he studies the Scriptures, so it ought to be very, very interesting. And he wrote that book, The Day of the Lord, so he was given that vision. So.
Well, I think it is a powerful audience, powerful lineup if you have a chance to listen. So it sounds like, Dorothy, you have something for every night of the week these days, and that's a good problem to have, I think. Well, tonight, folks, we have a powerful show lined up for you, and I know it's going to be powerful because I'm telling you something. Behind the scenes, the devil has been trying to worm his way in and mess us up. We had two guests lined up today. Well, actually three guests, but two guests that lined up that unfortunately cannot make it tonight. Augusto Perez is dealing with the loss of a loved one, so he can't be here, and we ask that you lift him up in prayer and remember him as he's dealing with those issues. And Intercessor Romy was supposed to be with us tonight, and she has come down with a migraine and is just feeling awful. She can't get off the couch. So, intercessors, I know that you're listening. I know many of you are her friends, and I would ask that you would intercede on her behalf for right now so that she can call in, so this headache would lift and she would be able to call in because she's on her back right now. And I know it's the enemy because the things that we're going to be talking about tonight are so important for the days in which we are living and the days in which we are coming into. I've entitled the show tonight, All Things Are Possible. And the reason that I did that is because we live in a 3D physical world, and yet we are seeing the supernatural explode all around us. And in many cases, that supernatural is dark. It's the dark side of the supernatural. But I'm here to tell you that as the body of Christ, as the remnant, we are able to walk in a way that supersedes this 3D realm. Not on our own, but via the Holy Spirit and via the work of God in our lives, we are able to see things and do things that the enemy cannot thwart. And believe me, audience, in these days, we are going to need that power to maintain or to be successful in the days that we are coming into. And in order to help me talk about these things, let me tell you how the show actually came about tonight. As you know, I haven't been on the radio in many months now. We were dealing with our own personal issues. No time to be on the radio. My last book just came out. Hopefully not my last book. My next book just came out last week, or last month, I should say. And so I was feverishly trying to get that done, as well as dealing with some other issues. We're trying to get out of town and all this other stuff. Well, Larry Taylor, who's a guest tonight with us, is a character in that book, for those of you that don't know. And Larry started getting emails about, hey, I heard you're a real person. You know, I just want to find out if you're real. And all those things in that book that said you did those things in that book, are they real? So Larry started thinking about this, and he called me a couple of days ago, and he said, Dan, we got to do this show because people think I'm not real, or they think I'm crazy, or they think whatever. But I think it gave us a great platform to talk about the things that we need to talk about. And the other guest that we was able to step in at the last minute, and I am not kidding, the last 15 minutes, is Rick Shaw. Many of you know Rick Shaw is the producer of the Powerful Watcher series with L.A. Marzulli. Rick in L.A. traveled to all points of the earth, filming and talking about the really strange things that mainstream media don't talk about. So I thought it was a wonderful fit for Larry to talk about the supernatural things and Rick to talk about the physical things, in addition to the Torah code video that is soon coming out that he's producing. So I think that despite all of the tricks and the wiles of the enemy, this is going to be a powerful show. So Larry, Rick, are you guys there?
We're here.
Oh, we're here.
Well, welcome, Larry and Rick. I so much appreciate you guys being on with me tonight, and I'm just looking forward to where the Lord leads. So before we get into that, Larry, you know, people have been wondering if you are real, and I know you're on the radio all the time, and many people in this audience already knows you, but there are new people that aren't familiar with this show or the work that you do. So do me a favor, Larry, and tell us a little bit about what you do and how it came about that you do that.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's kind of interesting how this started, and Richard, I'm really glad you showed up tonight. I so enjoy doing a show with Richard myself when we get a chance, because Richard, you know, and I've talked to him on the phone privately before, and there's hardly any time I ever call or talk to Richard that it is not so interesting. I just want to talk forever. I mean, Richard is able to really talk about almost anything, and then, you know, even tonight you said Larry will talk about the supernatural. Well, I don't know about that, but you know, I'm not too sure Richard might not have a few things to relate, especially, and I've been so intrigued with the I believe it was the Roger Lear photography work that was done with Richard using, I think he said he slowed down time or the scenes in a video. And I got to see what was through that window into what really appears, Richard, to be another or an added dimension that we don't normally ever see. I mean, we never, you know, if we do see it, like you say, it's moving so fast, we don't know what's going on. But I'll tell you what, I'm intrigued. But, you know, to go back to your, you know, question, Daniel, that you asked me, yeah, I'm real. You know, there's some days maybe I don't feel that real, but I suppose I am. But this is what's interesting, and you know, I began to get a lot of emails after your book came out, and it really surprised me because, you know, I had no idea that so many people were beginning to pick up and read and study and all of that, a little bit of what's going on in your book. And I got emails, are you real? And if you're real, what in this book is really real? This really intrigues me, what some of the stuff you're talking about. And, you know, I got to thinking, Daniel, I wanted to say, what is real in a really good fiction novel? Hello? But, you know, on the other hand, there's another part of the universe we hadn't talked about yet.
What is real in a really good fiction novel? I like that. You know, I've been asked that many times. Audience, for those of you that haven't read the book yet, Between the Veil came out, as I said, last month, and it has 175 footnotes and references in the back to links directly in the news. So a great part of that book is based upon real things that are happening, and particularly, Larry, with the discussions or the storylines that have you in it. Many of those stories, and I'm just going to tell you, audience, I mean, we're going to talk about some of those things, but to get the gist of all of them, you're going to have to get the book, because I don't want to, you know, I want to ruin it for anybody else that's reading the book. But I will tell you that almost all of those storylines, let me think, actually all of those storylines are based upon real discussions that I have had with Larry Taylor. Now, as an author, I take creative license. It is a fiction book, and I've kind of embellished a little bit in some of that stuff. But Larry Taylor is the foundation for Larry Taylor in Between the Veil. So he is a real guy, and some of those stories are just they're crazier in real life than they are even in that book. So, Larry, that just blows me away. Some things you tell me I couldn't put in a book. They're just too crazy. Now, of course, everyone knows who Rick Shaw is, and everyone knows who the Watchers series, or what the Watchers series are. But, Rick, you are working on a foundational DVD right now that has to do with the ancient Torah code. And I believe last time I was on the radio with you, we actually talked about that work, and you wanted to get this done, and I hear that you are working on it, working feverishly on it now. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little while, but how close are you to actually being done with that DVD, and what's it going to be called?
Well, thanks for asking. It's really a humongous job. It's harder to edit this show than it is a Watchers, and it's only because I'm emailing my friends in Jerusalem for just to check to make sure that the tables are totally correct and significant. And then also I'm working with Professor Robert Haralick, who is at City University in New York. And so there's like 5 of us that are in collaboration on just the tables that are going in it to make sure everything's perfect. And I don't think, and this isn't a boastful comment at all, but I don't think that a Torah Code film has ever been done like this, because in my experience, they've all been based on the tables from the Bible Code book, the Michael Drosnin book that came out in the late 90s. And that was basically the foundation for all these documentaries that came out in the following years. Well, it's been a good 10 years since any Bible Code film has been created, and I just felt like there needed to be a real one come out with tables that the rabbis and professors actually do. And basically I could make suggestions of what I needed, and they would create it, because I'm not an expert in ancient Hebrew. That's their job. And I think where some people have gotten in trouble before trying to do this is trying to do it themselves and not knowing the correct way to do it. So that's why it's taking so long. In fact, Rabbi Glazerson just flew in to the States yesterday. He called me when he touched down in New York, and he's coming to visit me next week. So he's going to get to screen the film of where I am so far. But I'm about 53 minutes in, and it's going to be a little over an hour when I get finished. And we're trying to stay right on track. It's looking like it should be mastered around the first or second week of December, and then it has to go into DVD replication. And this is the first Blu-ray film that we've done. And the reason for this being done on Blu-ray is because I wanted people to be able to see these tables in high definition instead of fuzzy NTSC standard def DVDs. But for the people that don't have Blu-ray players, there's going to be a standard def DVD in the same box. So it'll be like a big studio release with a Blu-ray on one side and a DVD on the other.
Well, that's very exciting, and you know, Larry knows. Larry had a hand in my first book being ran through the Torah Code, not through your sources, but Barry Rothman was kind enough to run it through there, and they actually found 3 Days in the Belly of the Beast, my first book, my name, and the storylines in that book, and I was stunned. But what was even more stunning are all the other fascinating things that can be found in the Ancient Torah Code. So I'm very curious to see, you know, the kind of things that you capture in that DVD for everyone to see. It'll really be something, and I'm looking forward to that. Now, you know, audience, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is it doesn't, you know, there's a lot of talk about what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri right now, and there's a lot of fear that is simmering just below the surface. And some of that fear, I think, is probably justified. And the concern, certainly, of something big breaking there is very, very important. We are coming to a time, the phrase end game comes to mind. And there are a lot of things that are playing out right now that will affect your life and my life. So whether you're a believer or not a believer, it doesn't matter. We all live in this same world. So the question is, how do we deal with the reality that we are seeing? But more importantly, how do we deal with it in such a way that our hearts will not fail for fear? Because, you know, it says in the Word that in the last days that it will be so bad that men's hearts will fail for fear. But the Word tells us that we can walk with peace that surpasses all understanding. And so that's what we are going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about the reality of the world we live in, the things that we see, the supernatural that we see, the supernatural that we don't see, the supernatural that we should see, and how are we going to deal with that. And in preparation for the show, what I did is I looked up a couple of different verses, and I did a brief study on them. And one of the things that I looked up was John 15:19, and you probably know the verse well. It says, if you were of the world would love its own, but because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this, the world hates you. Now, that's Jesus talking to his disciples, to those that want to follow him. Now, the interesting thing about this verse, and I don't know why I've never looked this up before, but the interesting thing about this verse is that word, world. Now, we think of that word, world, it's the Greek word for world is cosmos, Kosmos, and it literally means order. I'm going to repeat that. That word, world, when Jesus says you are not of the world, means order. So what he's really saying is you are not of the order in the world you live in. You're not part of that system, is what he was saying. And the other word that really struck me in this is that word, the world would love its own, right? The world would love its own. That word love is philaios, and the Greek word philaios. And philaios is a brotherly love. So the world would love you like a brother if you were part of the system, is what Jesus is telling you. So this is very interesting to me, because if you take a step back and you think about this for a second, we use this phrase often. You know, okay, I'm a little bit of a conspiracy nut, but we hear the phrase New World order. And we see things working in a certain way, and many of us step back and we go, wait a minute, that really doesn't go along with my Christian belief. It really doesn't go along with a biblical belief. And we see things transpiring and moving in a certain direction, and we say, wait a minute, can I participate in this or can I not participate in this as a believer? So, I mean, that's something between you and God, and I suggest that you'd really study the Word, but the point is that it is a system. It is an order, and Jesus told us that we're not of that worldly order. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we're talking about the world in which we are living in today. The other thing that really struck me is I started looking at Daniel 3:17, and you would remember the story well, guys. The Daniel 3:17 talks about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the story is that Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to worship him, basically, worship his gods, and they said, you know what? We will not worship your gods, even if you kill us. We will not worship him. And you know the story. They got thrown in the furnace, and they lived to talk about it. And then I started thinking about Daniel 6, where Daniel was thrown in the lion's den. And the interesting thing about Daniel is the king was tricked into making this edict where anybody that worshipped a different god would be thrown to the lions. And Daniel was thrown into the lions because he wouldn't bow. He wouldn't bow down. So why am I telling you all this, audience? Because we are coming into a time where you and I are going to have to make choices. We are supposed to be different. Now, what does that mean? That means that we are going to face things that are not convenient, that are not comfortable. So the question is, how do you face, two questions actually. What are some of those things which we're about to talk about now? And then how do you face those things with that peace that surpasses all understanding? So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the crazy things that we could very well be seeing in the not-too-distant future. Now, Larry, you know, one of the things that I keep reading in the news are accounts of exorcism. And what I'm being told is that there are exorcisms going on like crazy, and they're trying to recruit new exorcists. And, you know, we talk about deliverance ministries and, you know, demonology and stuff from time to time. But let me ask you a question. For those people that wonder if the things that I wrote about in my book, Between the Veil, about Larry Taylor, if they were true. Larry, have you ever seen a demon? Have you ever seen an angel, and are those two things real?
Oh, they're very valid. They're real objects. They're not necessarily just 3D, so to speak, three-dimensional. They're more than 3D. And demonic, oh my, very much so. I used to do, years ago, you know, I was on the road, and that's where I actually wound up ministering in a conference and met Augusto Perez and Tom Mack in Florida. You know, so I did, you know, I have never enjoyed deliverance ministry. I don't like it. It's not comfortable. I just, it's not my particular choice of things I'd like to be doing. And however, I have had to be doing them. And so they're very real. I mean, the demonic is real. The fallen angels are real. God's angels are real. I mean, just because you can't see them every single time, and really, you know, you wrote the book Between the Veil, the things unseen. You know, Daniel, that the things unseen, sometimes I wonder if aren't more real than what the tangible things we do see every day that we really want to believe in, because you know, we can lay our hands on it anytime we want to. We have the ability. We can hear those things with our normal ears. Well, you know, we can see them with our normal eyes. You know, the things in our tangible world. But you know, it's interesting that the Bible talks about clearly that those things visible were made out of the invisible, which really perplexes me a lot until I realize that I'm just a spectator, so to speak. That's what Standeo likes to say, is a lot of us are spectators, and we're watching everything go by, and we're really in I guess he would call it a hologram in a way. And so, they're real.
Well, something came to mind, and Rick, I think you probably have two cents to chip in here. We talk about physics, right? And you made a statement, Larry. It's very interesting. You said that you think that the supernatural is probably more real than or the unseen is probably more real than the seen. The supernatural is more real than the world we live in. Now, mathematically, I think that works out, at least when you look at physics, or at least in theory, because in any audience, you've heard me say this many times before, if you heard me before, I let it be known that M theory says that there are 11 different dimensions. And we live in a 3D world. If you believe Einstein, time is the fourth dimension. So actually we live in a 4D world. But Paul said that he wants to know a man in the third heaven. So I'm assuming that there's three heavens, right? And then there are four levels or four dimensions of hell. There's Hades, because hell and Hades, where Jesus stole the keys. There's the abyss, where there are Satan's angels that are imprisoned at the moment. There's a place called Taurus, and then there is the lake of fire. That's four different places. So there's four different places of hell, three different places of heaven. That's seven. That means that they outnumber the places that we actually can see in our 3D or 4D world. Now, Rick, that makes sense to me, but some people are probably rolling their eyes going, this guy is nuts. Rick, you have seen things pop in and out of various dimensions with the various videos that you've done on the Watcher series. What are some of the kind of crazy things that you've seen that would defy the physical laws? Give us like two different examples that would defy the physical, aside from the one that Larry gave earlier about the looking into that spaceship, because I want to get in there a little bit deeper. But aside from that, what are a couple different examples that you've seen things pop in and out of our 3D world?
Well, first of all, I'd like to touch back on something that you just mentioned, where you were talking about the invisible world versus the physical world. And if we go back to the Book of Enoch, there is this passage in there, and it's, of course, the Book of Enoch is an apocryphal book. It's not considered scripture, and yet some of us believe that it actually is. Just because it wasn't accepted by the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD doesn't mean it isn't scripture, because there's some things in Enoch, to me, really ring true. Here's a great example. In Enoch, when he talks about being at the throne of God, he mentions this creature that's full of eyes. Now, I don't know if that means that the eyes were real big and covered his head, or if he had lots of eyes all the way around. It seems like that's kind of what he meant. Well, we read about that same creature in the book of Revelation. It's described almost the same way, and the book of Enoch was written hundreds of years before Revelation was. So I believe that these guys are basically describing what they saw. But during that encounter with God, one of the comments that was made, God said he got tired of living in invisible space and wanted to create a physical universe. And he went off on how he did that. And it was almost like he was talking to elements to go do thus and so, and they did, and we ended up with what we have today. So I just thought that was interesting. So we have the physical and we have the non-physical.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting.
And so as far as seeing things, as you might have known, I'm really interested in the whole near-death experience scenario, because I feel like people that have had that experience, and I know Larry's had that, and LA has had it, and other people that I know and trust have had it, all of them basically say that things are far more real to them during that experience than they are when we're living here. Some of the things that people have told me is, well, like Howard Storm, for example, was saying that when he was in heaven, he didn't get there directly. he went through a situation where he actually visited hell first and was rescued from that environment. But when he got into heaven, he said his vision changed to a 360-degree view. It was like somehow he could see behind him and on all sides and ahead of him. His feet, he could feel the floor on his feet as accurately as if he was walking on the palms of his hands. It seems like all your senses are heightened. Everything works better. And that's our normal state is what I really think he's trying to describe there. And that this is what we're experiencing now in these fleshly bodies is more or less an illusion compared to what things will actually be like in the future. And so there was an early comment that you guys made about what do we do? There's all these people who are doomsday preppers, and how do we prepare for the coming apocalyptic times and the New World Order and all these things. I wrote an article for LA's News Mag last month that I called Extinction Paradigm, where I kind of listed all these things that people are currently afraid of. And there's a decent-sized list of stuff, and they're all true. We've got Fukushima. We don't know what that radiation is doing to the world right now, and they're certainly not going to tell us. There's the economy. We could lose the dollar, and it could turn our streets into chaos. There's what's going on in the Middle East with Iran and Hamas and ISIL. All of these forces are trying to get into Israel and cause big problems there and start some kind of a third world war. So we have plenty of things to worry about, but we also have to realize that this plane of existence that we're living on is temporary. And those things, as bad as they are, don't matter, because that's not where we're spending the bulk of our actual lives. And I remember Howard once telling me that when people come to your house to shoot you for a can of pork and beans, let them shoot you, because he was so anxious to get back to where he was that living or dying really meant nothing. And so, there are people. There's a show on called Doomsday Preppers where people have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars preparing for the apocalypse. And the problem with that is none of us know what's really going to happen. And we don't know if any of those things they're doing are going to sustain their lives or not. We really have no clue. So I think what we have to do is put our trust in God and no one else. Not that we shouldn't take sensible means, like if you don't have enough food to get you through 3 days if the power goes out, that's just plain stupid. You need to be ready for things like that. But whether you want to build underground bunkers and buy a retired nuclear missile silo and live in that, I mean, that's going, I think, a bit too far.
And Rick, that is probably the best advice that we can give anybody. A couple of things that pop out to mind, Larry, when Rick was talking, was that, the word says to live is Christ, to die is gain. And this was the reason why that guy wanted to go back to what he saw, because that life and in the presence of the Lord was not only better, but it was much more, how can I say this, abundant, much more full than the life that we live in our 3D box here. But the other thing,
Arthur, is that scripture, he who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life will find it.
Exactly. But it also strikes me, something else that you said, is that these guys are buying decommissioned missile sites and living down in a hole and they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars doing all this stuff. And I'm with you. I think it's a good idea to sensibly prepare. You got to sensibly prepare, right? But the fact is that you don't know what's going to happen. So how can you prepare for that which you don't know what's going to happen? And you can't prepare for everything. I don't care how much money you have, because you don't have that big of a brain. So here's the point, that unless you are hearing,
so what
Larry,
if you have I was just going to say, what if the Yellowstone caldera goes off, which a lot of people are afraid it might? There's all kinds of strange earthquake swarms and funny activity going on. There's streets melting, animals, running out at a high clip, and you go, what the heck's going on? Well, we don't know if that's going to happen or not, but say you buy an underground missile silo in Montana, and that thing goes off, and you're buried under, 300 feet of ash. What you going to do then? Well, you might be underground, but you're not going to survive that either. So it's like the only way to survive anything is to trust in God.
Well, and to hear his voice, to know what he is saying. And that's really the point of tonight. Tonight is all about the seen versus the unseen, and how to hear God's voice for the days that we are coming into. And Larry, when I think about the things that we are about to face, Rick has a very good point about, you could, if Yellowstone went off, all those little homes, the missile sites converted into homes, could be buried under that ash, and they're done. The Bible talks about that in the last days, that there'll be people in caves, and they'll wish they could die because they're hiding in caves. So, Larry, when we talk about hearing God's voice, about what to do and what not to do, where to go and how to go, one of the things I so much appreciate about your walk is that you strain, if I can say it like this, you strain your ears and bend them to the voice of God to hear what he wants you to do. As a perfect example, some of those stories in that book, Between the Veil, were things that you heard God tell you to do, and he snatched you away or took you to this place or that place. So what can you say to the audience, Larry, about being able to hear God's voice? How is it that you can hear God's voice and other people can spend their whole Christian walk and go, well, I don't hear God. They'll go to church, but they don't hear God. So how can somebody have that kind of relationship like you have? How can they hear God's voice?
Well, I guess I would have to liken it to 35 years of law enforcement to one degree. I can use that as an example. When I first went into law enforcement, I listened to AM and FM radios and et cetera, et cetera. I listened to songs all day long, running around in my car. But when I actually got in a police car, I had a walkie-talkie and I had a police radio, and I had to actually practice. I mean, seriously, I had to begin to practice to, if you're going along in a police car and you've got your AM or FM radio on, and they're trying to call you and you don't answer because you're not listening to the right radio, the right frequency, so to speak, you have problems. And I find that a lot of people have that similar problem. As a matter of fact, I have run into people that prayed so hard, Daniel. I mean, literally prayed, because I've been in the church world for years, and then I don't know what world I'm in now, a little kind of in between, I guess, like your book. But, seriously, they prayed so hard, if God spoke, they would have never heard him, because, you know what? It's kind of like I tell my wife sometimes, people talk so much they never listen. They never learned how to listen. They don't know how to listen. And so I had to actually train myself for years that this is the way it was. I'd even be talking to someone outside the car and taking notes from a witness or whatever. The minute the walkie-talkie or the police radio in my car came on, I tuned everything out, and I mean everything out, and would listen to what was said on that radio. It just became automatic. I automatically did that, and it was like I was trained to whatever frequency that was, that when it spoke, everything else dimmed, And so it's the same way in the spirit realm that I found, and this is clear. I'm not telling people to believe me. I'm just saying this is what I found, was that of course I pray, but I also have tried to be really, really good at listening. And I had to work at that, too, because here on Earth, and we're talking about this 3D fabrication of involvement we have with this so-called planet Earth. And I think that we are raised up pretty much talking all the time. I mean, it's about us, really about us. And we're not really raised up to listen. I mean, very few. You can go walk down the street and you don't hear hardly anybody listening, but you hear a lot of people talking. And in a way, it's the same thing, you know, in the spirit realm. You know, of course there's voices, you know. As a matter of fact, I've found in the spirit realm two voices. One you really got to watch out for, and that's the enemy of our soul, you know. And that's the voice of the demonic and the dark side, because you can hear that one too. But at the same time, the Spirit of God, and when it speaks, and you know, you've got to be trained that when that voice comes on, in other words, when the Spirit of God speaks to you, really, really listen. Tune everything else out, no matter what you're doing, and listen for it. And I don't know how to tell people to do this. I just have to say this is how it was for me. I had to learn to listen in the Spirit. That's not easy. But, you know, and I don't know how, you know, I get emails all the time, Daniel, from people that says, well, you know, they'll want me to tell them where they are to move to or what they are to be doing. Well, how in the world would I know? I mean, you know, I don't know those things. And I want to tell them what I want to say, Daniel, that I never say on Augusto shows or anybody else. I want to tell them, why don't you listen for yourself? Why do you need me? Why do you need an interpreter, so to speak, when you can hear it for yourself? But see, they can't hear it for themselves because they've never. One thing is the church really, as an entity, doesn't teach people to listen. Now, of course, there's always sermons going out and people listening to those, but I'm talking about not hearing in the 3D or just the 3D dimension that we live in, but really hearing from another dimension, a supernatural dimension, and that's something we're just not trained to do.
Well, you know, the Word says that Jesus said that my sheep know my voice, and another they will not follow. Now, I would submit to you guys that you cannot know his voice unless you talk to him on a regular basis, or unless you hear his voice on a regular basis, unless you commune with him. And I always use this example. My wife and I have been married over 30 years. And if I came home from work and I sat on the couch and she didn't say anything, but I talked at her, or vice versa, and then I got up and I went away to my computer, whatever, TV, whatever the case may be, but it was always just one-way conversation. I mean, what kind of relationship was that? How long would my marriage last? It wouldn't last 30 years. It would last 30 seconds. But, you know, people seem to think, and Rick, you know, this drives me crazy. When we talk about Yeshua, when we talk about Jesus, people get very religious, right? When we talk about the Bible, they get very religious. They put on their religious hats, their religious coats. Audience, I'm here to submit to you that what Rick was talking about, what Larry's talking about, what I am talking about is not about religion. I'm going to say this again. Talking to Yeshua, talking to the Father is not about religion. Hearing their voice is not about religion. The Word says in Timothy to study for yourself, study to show yourself approved, right? So you study. In other words, you consume by studying, so you know what He has already said because He's given it in His Word, and then you bounce those things off of Him via the Holy Spirit. That's what Larry is talking about. And you cannot do that if there's not a two-way dialogue going. But if you're always talking at Him, God, I need a new car. God, help me with my husband. God, help me with my wife. God, help me with my kids. God, I need this. God, I need... That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a relationship. And the difference is in this relationship with the creator of the universe, it requires us to go before Him in a way that we're not used to going before other people. We need to remember. There's a word, Rick, this you know, blows me away sometimes. We live in the 21st century, and understandably, the English language has changed over the centuries. But this word awesome, you know, you talk to your kid, that's awesome, Mom, that's awesome, Dad. The word awesome in the Old Testament, it doesn't mean that's terrific. It means that is really scary. that is a sight of awe. It means when the Bible calls God an awesome God, it means that he is it is a fearful thing to look on him because he's so magnificent, he's so big, he's so powerful. Now, Rick, you have seen some awesome sights in the time that you've been doing, producing, doing the Watcher series, and the other things that you've done. And one of those, Larry kind of tapped on just at the beginning of the show. He was talking about this shot that you guys got from in South America, and I know you talked about this on another show, but if you can briefly reiterate this, we got about 13 minutes before the break. But if you can tell us what you saw and then what you did in order to see that better, I think the audience would really appreciate that, because that was an awesome sight. It was, if you really stop to think about it, it was a scary thing that you saw.
Are you referring to the this UFO that is in Watchers 8?
Yeah,
because there's so many different sightings.
The one in Watchers, that one.
Yeah, I stumbled across a video because I'm constantly researching for materials, and I found this one that came from Brazil. And so I wrote the guy that had posted it on his YouTube channel, and we started a dialogue about it. And apparently there was this craft scene in Brazil that LA and I kind of nicknamed it the Scepter, because to me that's what it looks like. And it was the most unusual UFO sighting I've ever seen in my entire life, because it had it was made up of I don't know how many actual physical balls of light there were, but let's just say that there were a lot of them, and it was bright, and it was way up in the sky, and this guy did a great job filming it, but it had like the handle part of it detached, and there were like 4 or 5 orb-like lights that floated down to the ground level, or just above that, hovering above the horizon. All those balls of light then coalesced into one large ball, which then disappeared. Meanwhile, the top of the Scepter, and I didn't play in Watchers 8 because I figured people would go to the kitchen to get a Coke and not sit there and watch the whole thing. But essentially, it ended up with this ring of light with the center missing, and it just hung over the city for a long time. But I don't know what that was. It wasn't a physical ship. It wasn't like a metal spacecraft, or it wasn't like a 50s-looking UFO with a little dome and the alien driving it around, and that kind of thing. It didn't look like that. This was more of a interdimensional kind of energy-based craft, something that we're starting to see more and more of these lights in the sky that are flying in formation, or that somehow do things that defy physical laws. And I'm not making this stuff up. This is like people are seeing these like in Oakland, California. They're seeing them in Colorado. They're seeing tons of it over Mexico City and Guadalajara and in Peru. But we never know when they're going to happen. They just kind of do. Now, LA and I get letters from people all over the country that tell us stories about things that they've seen. And we got a letter this week from this woman who said something spoke to her mind, that if you'll go outside, it was like in the middle of the night, it was like 2:33 in the morning. If you go outside, you'll see a UFO. So she walks out there, and there it is. And then it told her, go get your camera So she went back in and got her camera. But then she had this kind of thing happen to her every so often, to the point where it was no longer an interesting thing. It was almost like these entities were being demanding about it and wanting attention. And that when something like that happens, then you know who you're dealing with. These aren't the good guys. And I think that's why it's so complicated, because we can't just label all these things with a broad brush and say they're all malevolent or they're all angels or they're all this or that, because I think there's a lot going on right now that makes it more difficult to know right off the bat. But like L.A., my friend L.A. would say, we're supposed to test the spirits. Now, that doesn't mean to give them a chart, say, can you see this from 50 feet? It's basically to see if you ask them about Yeshua, what their response is. If they go away, then they're not the good guys. If they're supportive of it, then it's a different story. But it's rare for them to be supportive of it. In our experience, that seems to be the case. And we've had people who've been abducted that tell us that when they invoke the name of Christ, that they're left alone. Yeah, it doesn't happen to everyone. It doesn't happen to everyone, but I would say as a general rule, it seems to be effective.
You know, one of the things that when I wrote 3 Days in the Belly of the Beast, my first book, I was confounded by the things that we see in Scripture, and we don't have any real explanation for, and we try to give them these descriptors that people can understand, or at least the prophets did as they wrote about them, but they still didn't make sense even in their own time. However, when we take a step back and we look through the lens of our modern age and through the lens of physics, they make a little bit more sense. I'm not saying they make all sense. They all make sense, but I am saying that they make a little more sense. And when you think about, wheels of fire in the sky and stuff like that, it really does make you wonder what they were seeing. I say all that.
Well, I agree. I mean, if say that you saw something today, and we do this. We'll describe stuff in our vernacular. It's like, well, it looked like a red LED. Now, how would Elijah describe that? Oh, it was a ruby that glows like fire. I don't know. Yeah. But they would use objects that they were familiar with and handled and used, and other people would know what they're talking about. Whereas we've got all kinds of stuff. We have plasma displays and flat panel TVs and stuff that lights up. We've got EL wire that, like I had one just from a moment ago here that I just disconnected to my phone just to charge it, and it looks like there's like this little string of LEDs that light up and flow into the phone, and that's when I know it's getting a charge. And I find that helpful to see the direction of the current. It lets me know if my phone's charged or not. Well, how would you possibly explain that 2,000 years ago? What would you say? It was like a snake that went into the phone and it lit up. It's like, that makes no sense. You know what I'm saying?
That's good.
We've got we have stuff that we're using now and we're used to it. We understand the technology of it. And I don't think this can go on much longer, guys. I really don't. I think that, we're coming to a certain reality where we're no longer going to be looking through the glass darkly. It's like this stuff is we have to use our heads and then read the Scripture and try to understand what these guys were talking about. So when Ezekiel's saying, I saw this wheel within a wheel and it was the color of a beryl stone, well, I looked it up the other day. Beryl stone is silver gray. What does that sound like? Silver gray. It's like metallic, like what all the UFOs look like now. A wheel within a wheel. That doesn't mean that the wheels were at 90 degrees to each other. People get that idea because Ezekiel describes it that it could move in any direction. It doesn't mean it has to have wheels going in different directions. It just means that there could have been concentric rings which is what we see all the time in these UFOs.
Well,
Moving in opposite directions or lights, I mean, it's like Gary Stearman's example when he was, basically escorted to the airport when his plane had a problem, and the ship comes within 50 feet of his wing, and it's all lit up and lights are dancing all over the surface of it. And he told me later privately that I felt like I was looking at a living creature. And that's kind of what the scriptures also say.
He also lost time, if I recall, in that experience, and he had a technical failure in his engine. He should have crashed, ran out of gas or something. So, that really makes. In fact, I don't know that I've ever said this about Between the Veil. One of the things that the Holy Spirit really pressed me to get that book done. It had been about 65% done, and many of you know that. My wife had some health problems, and, we had other stuff going on, death in the family, all this other stuff. Just stuff, life, life crowds out work sometimes. And so that was the case with me, and people were pressing me to get this book done. But I had about 65%, and I didn't feel if I can say it like this, the unction to get it done, because I promised that I would not write anything on my own, that it had to be done. And I had a lot of thoughts, a lot of, storylines, but I needed to make sure that it was the Lord giving me the story. And when he began to do that, when he began to finish out the story and push me to get it done, I was still consumed with the other things that were going on in my life, and I had this overwhelming feeling that, and Elliot coined this phrase a while back, the coming great deception. And I asked him if I could borrow the phrase, and I used it in all my books, as a matter of fact, giving credit to L.A. for the phrase. But I had this overwhelming feeling that we are about to see disclosure, that we were about to see the coming great deception. And the church doesn't know how to deal with that. The world certainly doesn't know how to deal with that, but the church doesn't know how to deal with that. So some of the storyline in Between the Veil has to do with the coming great deception, and we can talk a little bit about that on the other side of the break. But the point is that I think you're absolutely right, Rick, that it can't keep going on like this. We are entering into a time. What is that phrase that Ellie uses all the time? I always see when he writes it that they are that UFOs are not going away. I'm gonna mess it up, so you have to help me.
UFOs are real, burgeoning, and not going away.
That's right. And so that's what we are faced with, and if we do not face the fact that we are in a different time and that it is the end of the age, and we are about to see things transpire that none of us are ready for, that when it happens, we won't even know how to deal with it. So the point is, in those books that I wrote and in the videos that you do and the other things that Larry talks about, it is all designed to prepare the masses. We'll talk more on the other side of the break.
Come
That was Hillsong doing You're My Healer, and a perfect example of how the supernatural supersedes our own 3D physical world. And, it's important. We're talking about some crazy stuff, and the reason that we talk about the things that we talk about is because we need to be aware of all the things that are going on. We can't live inside this little box where we think we have all the answers. So we have Rick Shaw on talking about some of the crazy things that he has seen during his time doing the Watchers, and he's going to talk about the Torah code a little bit. We have Larry Taylor talking about some of his experiences. I would be remiss. One of the things that Romy Zurit was going to talk about when she was on is the things that God took her through. Some of the things that she saw. She had visions, and like you, Larry, she's left her body and seen the Lord. And she thought when she first got saved, all this stuff was happening. She thought that was normal for everybody. She thought everybody had that kind of experience. Well, most people do not have that kind of experience, so it's important that we hear stories like we're hearing. We hear truths like we're hearing so that we can know how to deal with things as they come upon us, and they are coming upon us very quickly. And Dorothy, do you have Deb with us? Is Deb on yet? I don't know if you're there, Dorothy, if you can hear me.
No, she hasn't called in yet.
Okay, well, when she calls in, just interrupt us, and we'll talk about her show real quick, okay? And then we'll get back to the discussion.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Dorothy. Now,
there's
go ahead, Rick.
Oh, sorry, guy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's some things that have happened just recently that are really along this topic, but that really I'm still just kind of amazed by them. One of them is I have a Jewish friend that lives near the Hollywood area, and he just thought he would start studying ancient Hebrew for whatever reason, And so he's had experiences with UFOs and all of that kind of thing, and sometimes the odd thing is that the friends that I have that are Jewish and not necessarily Christian per se are more open to the idea of UFOs and aliens than the Christian church is, because they know this is part of their heritage, and according to a lot of their ancient mystical texts, all this has to happen before the Messiah can return. So they really dig into this and try to get answers. So one thing he discovered was in the book of Deuteronomy, which is the last book of the Torah, the fifth book, which is a big Jewish thing. I mean, the Torah is like an amazing set of books. He found this passage, like if you look into the original Hebrew and you take out the commas that were put in there for our benefit but weren't there originally. The passage says, "What is the land to which we go? Our brothers have frightened us, saying the people there are superior to us with large fortress cities in the sky, and we saw the giant people there." Talking about cities in the sky. Now, if you look in other translations that are trying to make something sensible out of this, they'll talk about walls that go to the sky, but in the original Hebrew, that's not what it says. So there's stuff that's coming out of the Torah that's just like, that's going to be in the Torah code so you can see it for your film, so you can see it for yourself. But stuff like this is impressive because to me that all makes sense, because the giants came from the sky. That was part of the whole thing. They were the fallen ones that mated with the women of earth, and they ended up with these abominations, these giants that basically took over the entire world before the time of Noah. And they continued to do this after the flood. There was further incursions of them. I believe that some of the stuff that we've discovered in Peru with these gigantic skulls, further attempts to try to do the same thing again. I really do. That's why it's so important for us to get DNA evidence and prove it scientifically. And that's what we're currently involved in trying to do.
Yeah, Richard, that the incident I wanted you to talk about, explain a little bit about, was when it's the craft. I think Roger Lear had some video of it, and when you looked in this window-like area, you could see creatures there, small ones like grays maybe, and then maybe a praying mantis-looking thing. That's the one and you slowed time down, I believe, to look inside deeper, was what you said. Do you remember that one?
Yes. In fact, in Watchers 9, I'm going to do a complete expose on all of that. But basically, to describe it to you, there is a physical law called time dilation. And basically what that is if you're standing on one plane and you're looking at something else, like through a camera, that's in its own time domain, then it's going to look like it's running at a different speed. Can you grasp that idea? I think this is why we see UFOs that zip by at ungodly speeds that no other craft could possibly move at, and they're saying, well, it went by at 4,500 miles an hour. Well, it would be burning up if that was the case. Not in our same time-space domain, but we're standing on the Earth watching something move in a way that looks very unnatural, and it's because the only technical explanation I can have for it, and it may not always be a technical one, but I believe it's their form of propulsion that gives them the ability to levitate their craft without having propellers running or rocket engines blowing, hot air out of them, that they're basically warping space and gravity to do what they're doing. And when they do that, it makes it look like they're moving faster. So I wondered if the video that you're talking about, Larry, was the Kumburgaz, Turkey UFO footage that was shot in 2009.
Yeah.
It was shot by a guy, I think his name was Yeltsin, who was he was a cameraman, a videographer. He had a Canon, something like a GL1, which is not like the super professional one, but it was an NTSC camcorder, and he had a Sony 200 millimeter extender lens on it. And Roger was there, and they were on the shore of Lake Van in Turkey, in Kumburgaz. And this thing looked like something bright in the sky, like a star or something, until you zoomed in on it, and then it was kind of a boomerang-shaped craft that looked for all the world like the craft on, if you've ever seen the 50s movie, War of the Worlds, it looked very similar to that craft, weirdly similar to it, except for the fact it didn't have this kind of goofy gooseneck thing shooting laser beams out of the top. It didn't have that part. But the actual craft itself was almost the same shape. And in fact, I did a Photoshop thing where I cut out the one from War of the Worlds and put Roger's spaceship on the same page, and I showed it to him before he passed away, and he just cracked up because it looks so much like it. You have to wonder, But
you have to wonder where the idea for that picture came from in the first place. And if I can interrupt you there for a second, Rick.
Sure.
I have somebody on the line here. I have Deb Lemke on the line. She's the host of Dorothy's new show, Healing River. Deb, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Daniel. I feel bad interrupting you guys.
No, that's all right. We're going to get back to this very deep discussion, but I think it's so important. The work that you're doing on your show is so important. I was hoping that you could tell the listening audience when your show is on and what's the gist of it. What is your focus on the show?
Absolutely. Our show, Healing River, is on Friday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time Zone. And the premise of the show is to help people understand that spiritual healing is important and it underlies any physical or mental healing. I think in our culture we tend to first go to doctors for medications and for secular therapists, And we end up with a lot of chronic illness, and it never gets better. But God is our healer, and he can actually heal a lot of what's going on and underlying this. And when we seek that spiritual side first, we find a lot of times these other illnesses go away or improve dramatically. And so it's getting people to understand that. And related to your topic that you've been talking on now, we did a show on sleep paralysis just a couple weeks ago, and how that relates on the spiritual side, because I know people come in with that and have a lot of anxiety, and they don't really understand the source of it or how simple it is to treat it, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful. So we have Deb Lemke. She's the host of Healing River. That's on Friday night. And Deb, that what's the time of that show again?
It's 8 p.m. Eastern, and this week's show is going to be talking about healing from shame. So it'll be very helpful for everybody.
Wonderful, and you can find that audience on the same blog talk station, the Portal. So, Deb, thanks so much for coming on for a second, and I'll be listening on Friday, as I'm sure that all of our audience will as well. So, thank you so much for being with us very briefly.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, Rick. You were talking about the, and I think stuff like this is so important because we talk about crazy stuff, UFOs, but we need to understand that the stuff that we are talking about has everything to do with what Deb Lemke was just talking about. This is the supernatural world. If you want to talk about, going to a doctor or going to a dentist, getting your teeth pulled, that's the physical world. If you want to talk about the supernatural stuff that happens outside of medicine, that's the supernatural world. So it is very much along the lines of what we were talking about today. And Deb was going to come on at the very beginning of the break to not interrupt you, but we can get back to the subject now. And I hope I didn't break your train of thought, because what you were talking about was fascinating. You were talking about how you were looking at Dr. Lear had got this video footage of this UFO in Turkey and how it looked like the flying saucers in the War of the Worlds, which is one of my favorite movies, by the way, and how it was uncanny when you photoshopped the motion picture UFO to the one that was caught off the coast of Turkey. So please continue.
Right. It had kind of that same boomerang shape to it, which is really interesting. It had definitely a clearly visible shape and ridges to the front of the ship, and a portal that you could look into, and you could see creatures moving around in it. Now, I've never seen any other video of a UFO where that's the case. And so I asked Roger if he would let me use it in Watcher 7, and I said, look, if you let me use your master where I can get a really good clean copy of it and not pull it off of YouTube, I will make it into high def for you and color correct it and give it back to you on a disc. So he said, okay, great. So I ended up with that footage, and then, God bless him, last March he passed away. So I have this master footage that Roger gave me and one of the things that's in Watcher 7 where we show this craft was there was a researcher in Chile by the name of Mario Santiago. And Mario, I don't know what year it was he did this, but since the video was shot in NTSC in 2009, it might have been later that year, they somehow got him that tape. And he went into it and stripped fields from it, because NTSC is notoriously bad with field artifacts, and if you can look at it as frames instead of fields, you can often get a clearer picture. So he did that, and zooming in on it digitally, discovered that there appeared to be a third alien in the window. Now, he is a pretty good artist, and so he kind of traced it over the actual picture of the UFO and drew what he believed he was seeing, and it looked like what we were saying a few minutes ago, a praying mantis type of creature. Well, I never saw that. In my version of it. And when I finally finished Watchers 8, it was a big, huge job, and I kind of had to decompress from it. I thought, I wonder if this digitized footage that I have that Roger gave me, which is like the cleanest digital version of it that we know of, if I went into it like Mario did, if I could find this third creature. Well, so normally the way you do something like that is you go into a program called After Effects that has the tools to really tweak video and really change the luminance and contrast levels and see what you can see with it. So I did that, and lo and behold, I found that big alien that Mario had seen, and it was moving really quickly. It was just kind of like stuttering around. I mean, it was just moving so fast, I couldn't really tell what it was doing. And I thought, you know what? And I told Roger this at dinner one night. I said, I think we're seeing the results of time dilation, that really this creature isn't moving that fast at all, but to us it looks like it because this ship was levitating over this body of water for several hours. So he goes, that's brilliant. He shouts in the parking lot in the middle, and that's really funny. So I thought, well, maybe in After Effects I can slow this way down. Well, there's a point to where you can slow video down to where it just looks like a slideshow. You're just looking at individual frames. So I slowed it down to about 25% of its actual speed, and then I could see this creature moving around and turning its head back and forth rather quickly. And I'm thinking, why is it doing that? Until I realized it had these big triangular-shaped eyes, very clearly visible, and the eye surface was reflecting lights on the ship. You could see that. And it looked weird. It freaked me out. I have to tell you, it freaked me out the first time I saw this because I thought, I'm not drawing this in. I'm just adjusting the contrast so I can see the image. And all this stuff appeared. When I slowed it down, I saw he was turning his head back and forth. I said, well, this looks kind of like a praying mantis. So what are the qualities of a praying mantis? So I did like a Google search and pulled up all these images of these little insects. Well, their eyes are stuck to their head. They don't have rotating eyeballs. So the only way they can look around them is to turn their head. And they're very adept at doing that. If you've ever seen pictures of praying mantises, they have this really thin neck, and they can like swivel their head all the way around and look at you kind of oddly. They're really funky, weird little creatures. They're kind of fun looking, and some people actually put a little leash on them, and they have them as pets, and they somehow they do that. Yeah, well, they have them as little pets. Some of them are like 5 inches long. They're big.
This
I had
idea,
one in my yard last year.
This idea of time displacement I find very interesting. There was a guy that came out in the 80s, and his last name was Lazar. Larry, you and I were talking about this just last week. I think his name was David Lazar or something like that. He had talked about how there were UFOs on not Area 51, but this other site that he actually worked at, and how they had back engineered the technology, and how within that UFO they created a electromagnetic field, and it actually slowed down time in order for this thing to work. And that whole idea sounded very familiar to a discussion that I had with Stan Dale, as a matter of fact, who actually said kind of the same thing. But Larry, you didn't know I was going to ask you this, but you just recently, just last week, had a very, very interesting experience when you were reading Interstellar and about time displacement or something like that. Can you share with us what happened there?
Oh, it was a very interesting. Recently, you had told me about the movie Interstellar, and I'd posted it a couple times on my blog, and I actually, I haven't seen the movie. I'm nowhere near the movie theater, but I did get my hands on a book that just recently came out, the novelization of Interstellar. And I was reading that book, and very interestingly, I got up and came to another area of my house, and all of a sudden it just simply felt like time slowed down. Now, that's not something you can, most people wouldn't even probably perceive that it happened. But I'm very sensitive, and of course, living in an area where there are a lot of electromagnetic anomalies and such, I recognize changes, just simple changes in the atmosphere, the environment around me. And so anyway, it was just what felt like time slowed just for a moment, like a fluctuation of time, and then everything seemed to resume normal. Now, one of the interesting things, and I had told Richard about this one time. A friend of mine over in Arkansas was wakened one night, and there was and I haven't found the copy. I've got a copy. I'm going to try to get Richard of the photograph he took of a saucer-looking craft that was behind his house. And when he went outside with his camera, it was just the other side of a small area, patch of woods, but he could see it clearly, and it was round, and it had what appeared to be windows or port, like on a ship, a circular window or some type of windows around the side of it. But what was so interesting, he told me, and I talked to him personally about it, and I got a picture of it, but he said what was so interesting was that the closer he got to it, the more time seemed to slow down, and it scared him, and he backed up and took a picture and ran to the house. But he felt that. I mean, literally felt it. And as a matter of fact, he works for a water corporation, in Arkansas, and he doesn't have any expertise particularly other than mechanical and dealing with water systems. But he felt time slow down. And what's interesting, too, is Stan Deyo says the very same thing. He says these craft, some of those craft, that the time is different inside it, moving faster, or appears to be moving faster than it is outside of it, where people are taking pictures or whatever. And and really, this book, Interstellar, it's a remarkable book. I won't talk any more about that, but there are some really strange things going on the planet. And when I heard about the photograph, and then I saw it in the Watcher series, the triangle looked like craft, and the beings inside it, because I saw a little of the work that Richard had done in the filmography of it. It was amazing. I mean, it just absolutely amazing.
Well, guys, if I can jump in here on this, because I'm really excited about this, because to me it's like we can think this stuff is weird and we can call it creepy and all that kind of thing, but really there's a spiritual side to it, and there's a highly scientific side to it, and this stuff is real. We're not making this up. I'm not making an elaborate story just to tell people just to sell DVDs. We're just not like that. We just want people to know that some of the things that you read about in the Bible are true. They're just trying to describe stuff, and they don't know how to do it. And we can take this whole idea of the time manipulation a step further, I think. It may be that when you're around beings like this, they create this time of their own. I don't know how they do it, but it's something that they're able to do. Okay, let's say that's a given. Well, then Moses goes up on Mount Sinai to get the Torah. And we know there was all kinds of crazy stuff going on the mountain when he did that. I mean, if you start reading Exodus, there was strange stuff going on in the world during that time period. Strange stuff. Right. So Moses may have only been, in my calculations, just trying to figure out how fast these creatures were actually moving and to slow it down to where they, to me, look normal. To me, it's about 10 times normal speed. So if we took that figure, which is kind of an easy number, times 10, Moses was on the mountain for 40 days, but maybe he was only there for 4 days, which would really a whole lot of sense, because he's wondering why Israel thinks he's dead and building a golden calf and doing all that stuff. He's totally like, what? Can't you guys hold together for a couple days? and they thought he was gone for 40 days.
That is
amazing. The other thing is,
That is so important what you just said, Rick, because Larry, one of the things that movie Interstellar touched on was time displacement. The fact that when people were in outer space, they came back and they were still young, but everybody else on Earth was older. Now, this is not fiction. That is science. And so, Rick, what you're talking about is science.
We're talking about, our fleshly bodies and trying to deal with things that are supernatural, but that these things are real, and we can be affected by them. And Moses comes off the mountain with his face glowing and had to put a veil over his face and all that stuff. I mean, that's like another deal. But also in the book of Enoch, there's this paragraph that talks about Moses' experience, and they taught him all this stuff about the Torah, and it says when he stepped off the mountain, he forgot it all in a moment of time. He forgot it all. So they had to write it down and give it to him, it says in the book of Enoch, as a gift. Okay? Now, if you hold that thought for just a second,
wait a minute, was that
every one of these abductions that we have, all these abduction experiences, people forget them instantly.
That's right.
As soon as they're away from these beings, which, as far as we can tell, have the same powers of angels that we read about in scriptures. So we're talking about a very fine line between angels and aliens. Well, today, looking at them with our eyes, we would say this is an alien being. We would probably not call it an angel because we don't know what an angel looks like. We don't know if they really have wings or what. We don't know. In fact, some people think that cherubims are the grays. I'm not so certain of that because the grays typically have been benevolent in almost every case that I've read where people are talking about them. But, there may be some good ones. I don't know. But they're little guys. And the cherubims were supposed to be little guys. And I have some Jewish friends that believe that's who they were, that these little grays were the cherubims. Now, I don't know. I'm not saying that I know. I'm not saying that I'm trying to foist a cult on somebody or anything like that. But I say this stuff fascinates me because it's like we're getting a grip on it for the first time. Like maybe this is something we can actually understand if we just had a little more information. That's what we try to do in Watchers.
This is really, really important. We have about 27 minutes left of the show, and so we worked for an hour and a half to get to this point because we are entering a time when common sense and regular dialogue will not describe the things that we are seeing. In a very short order, people are going to be seeing things and are seeing things that make no sense to them. And so what we had hoped to do in the show tonight is to give you some sort of anchor to pigeonhole some of those things that you will see. Notice what I said, that you will see, because you will see some of these if you already have it. More people in the UK, and they're not correct in thinking this, but more people in the UK believe in UFOs than they believe in God. The point is that a lot of people are seeing this kind of thing, and when they begin to manifest, good or bad, you are going to need to know how to do it, because the Word says in the last days that the enemy will do exploits, and they could even deceive the very elect if God didn't cut the time short. So the point is that we are entering into a time when all of this crazy stuff is beginning to happen. And so what we needed to do tonight is to get through this first hour and a half introduction to get right here, because right here is where the rubber meets the road. Larry, there's a story in Between the Veil. By the way, before I forget, because I'll forget if I let it go any further, Larry, can you do me a favor and give out your contact information, your website, that kind of thing?
Well, it's just basically people can go to LarryWTaylor.org. That's my blog site, and follow it, LarryWTaylor.org.
Okay. And Rick, I know that you're with Pinlight Productions. and you also work on the watches. What kind of information that can you
if you just go to pinlight.com, pinlight.com, or you can also, if you want to see the Torah code updates, you can go to endtodarkness.com.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. And
it's
of course,
not into, but ENDTO, end, like the end of something, endtodarkness.com.
Into darkness. That's catchy. I like that. Into darkness. And talking about the Torah code. And of course, audience, my website is danielholdings.com, and you can get Between the Veil and the other books on that website, as well as other interesting information on there. Larry, one of the stories in Between the Veil that somebody recently, I think they recently asked you about this, was the story where you found yourself. First of all, let me just clarify something. I got the idea of the title Between the Veil. You didn't actually give me that idea, but it came to me as you were talking about an experience of being between dimensions, and it just popped, and that's how I got the title. But you gave me an experience one time. You told me about an experience where you actually met somebody in a glass box, and this was an example of an awesome creature. Can you elaborate on that very quickly? We have about 23 minutes left.
Well, I won't use all that time up. I'll be short. I had an experience, and this is one thing that I do not do. You know, I know all about remote viewing and remote influencing and out of the body and all those code names, so to speak. But what I do, I simply don't do anything other than it has to be initiated by the Holy Spirit. And so anyway, I get some adventures sometimes over the years, and this is one of those. I was taken into another dimension, and I did not know for a little while the Lord was with me, but he was standing right behind me. I knew someone was behind me, but I wasn't sure who it was, and I was brought up to a really massive, all I can call it, best thing to say is it looked like a containment tank, and it was a see-through containment tank. I mean, I don't know whether it's glass or some kind of special, you're talking about another dimension. So just like Richard said, a lot of things we see other than Earth, I guess you could say, is very difficult to describe because we don't have our own ruling system or ruler to match them with. And so anyway, I was there, and apparently the Lord himself was there too, and he was showing me what he had called, and I was literally given the full name of this creature that I was looking at. It appeared to be a creature made of energy. It had a humanoid-like body. It was the most beautiful color, the color was
violet.
What?
Violet.
Yes, violet. That's the exact word, violet. It was violet color. It was very beautiful in color, and it was massive in size, and it was in some type of containment. Maybe you could call it a prison or whatever you want to, but I was given the name, and the name was very, very long, and I cannot remember it. It was almost like you begin one of these names in the Bible to somebody like Belshazzar or something, and it was difficult. I could not remember the name. However, the name meant ancient evil, and we wonder all this time. We look back towards evil or evil doing, and we think about maybe Lucifer, but then we don't have any answer to, well, where did he, if there was evil found in him, where did that come from? I mean, there's a lot of things we don't have answers to. But anyway, this creature was, whatever that long name was that it was given, I heard it, but my mind couldn't really receive it all, and so I remembered it as ancient evil. And the most interesting thing was it was the most deadly thing I have ever in my lifetime seen. I mean, of course, the Lord's awesome too. But I mean, this thing I was standing in front of, and it's in your book, Daniel. I saw where I went down and looked again in the book as a character, and but I won't go any further. But it was the most deadly thing. It's like this thing literally absorbed life from other things. In other words, it is deadly beyond measure. I don't even know how to describe the deadliness I felt of it. But, you know, the interesting thing was it looked at me and it told me. And when I say it told me, it was like thoughts. In other words, I knew what it meant. You know, I knew what it said. I understood. It wasn't words, though, but it was understanding. It looked at me and said it knew who I was, and it served the one with me. And that's when I turned, and the Lord was standing right behind me all the time. And so, you know, that's really a strange situation, but it is very, very real, and it was very vivid. And, man, there you are.
Well, you know, people have been wondering about the stories in that book, if they were real or not. Now, I did take some creative license with that story, Larry, and you know I went a little further, and you're going to have to read the book if you haven't read it, because Larry's story about ancient evil is in that book, but it goes on even further after that. So, Rick, what's one of the scariest things that you've seen in the supernatural realm or the UFO realm?
Well, I haven't seen it myself, but I know people that have, and we interviewed them for to me, like one of the scariest things is the black-eyed children. Pretty creepy.
Those are.
Are you
really
familiar with that?
Sure. Yeah. No. I saw I have the watches where you talked about that. There is a resurgence of black-eyed children, are there not? They kind of went away for a little while, but they're actually resurging now, aren't they?
Well, I talked to David Weatherly a few months ago. He's the guy that wrote the book, The Black-Eyed Children. He's written another book since then. I forget the title of it, but it's about other beings that he's been studying. But the black-eyed children are real. They've appeared to people, and they seem to just like to scare people and then leave. They seem to be interdimensional. They can appear and disappear at will in very remote locations. And I think the one story that we did in Watchers 5 was about a guy who was driving a truck across the state of Texas at 3 a.m. and had to take a leak. And when he came back to his driver's side door, there was a child standing there. Now, he's like in the middle of nowhere, which he liked driving late at night through Texas. You know, for his job, he had to transport his stuff around. And this kid said, let's go for a ride. And he said, what are you doing out here? Do you have any parents? Or, you know, there's no houses anywhere near the area. And this kid looked up, and when their eyes met, this child, or what looked to be about the size of a child, his entire eyeballs were black. And he knew this thing it's just scared him half to death. And this guy's like a former military guy, but he took off in his truck and left the kid standing there. Well, he snapped to his senses after he'd left. He goes, what am I doing? There's this kid I've just left in the middle of nowhere. So he made a U-turn and came back to where the kid had stopped him, and the kid was gone. He looked all over the place for him and couldn't find him. We've had other stories about where someone will hear a knock at the door, and their big old German Shepherd dog runs and hides under the bed, knowing there's something evil at the door. And the dog wouldn't eat for 3 days afterwards. It's just freaked the dog out like something incredible because this thing was standing there. So this is a phenomenon that's happening, and the reason I think it's real is because when we were starting to do that, and I read David's book, and I read that story about the truck driver, and I told him, well, we've got to reenact that because that's really wild. So I told a friend of mine named Terry that we were going to do that, and she said, what's the story about? I said, it's about the black-eyed children, and she started screaming. And I didn't know what it was a strange reaction. I just wasn't prepared for it. And she goes, my friend just had that experience and told me about it over the phone like 2 days ago. I said, oh, come on, Terry, really? I just didn't believe it. She goes, yeah. And her name was Laura, and she lived in Milwaukee. And I said, well, do you think she'd let us interview her? And she goes, Yeah, and I said, well, I don't know if we have the budget to fly to Milwaukee to get this interview. She said, she's going to be in L.A. next week. This is like what happens at Watchers all the time, this kind of crazy synchronous stuff. So this woman shows up, never heard of David Weatherly in her life, never knew that there was a book about black-eyed children in existence, and when we showed her the cover, which showed kind of like an artist's conception of a black-eyed child, it just freaked her out. She goes, oh, get that away from me. She was really traumatized by her experience. So I know this stuff is real because sometimes the Lord will pull some strings for you to kind of help out so that we can believe that these things are happening.
Well, and this is the point of this audience. There's about 14 minutes left in the show, so we're kind of winding down. But the reason why these things are coming out and the reason why we are talking about them tonight is because you will see, I promise you this, within the next few years, you will see something that does not make sense. You cannot categorize it in the academic education you've had, whether you went to college or not. It doesn't, or just regular school. It's not going to make sense. Your life experience will not speak to these things. You're going to see things that are crazy because we are coming into the end of the age. But it's important for you, audience, to remember who you are. If you are a believer in Yeshua and you walk with him and you are in a relationship with him, the word says that greater is he in me, Yeshua, than he that is in the world. So these things, as you begin to see them, need not frighten you. I had an experience a couple of years ago. I was sitting at my desk, and off the desk was a patio door that led out to the patio. And I don't know what I was doing. I was watching a video or something, and I smelled a whiff of sulfur out the door. And the Holy Spirit immediately told me what that was. Now, without stopping what I was doing, I simply said, in the name of Jesus, get out of here, because I knew what it was. And it left immediately. Here's the point. If you know who you are, these things that you cannot categorize do not have power over you. They need not scare you. The point is that as we are coming into the end of the age, the Word says that we are to be salt and light to the earth, that we are more than conquerors in Christ Jesus. So as you begin to see these things, you're going to remember the cutting edge, and you're going to remember Rick Shaw telling his crazy stories, and Larry Taylor telling his crazy stories, and that fictional writer Daniel Holdings. And you're going to remember that you heard about some of these crazy things, but you need not be frightened of them if you know who you are in Yeshua. But you have to be walking with him, and that's really the point. Now, Rick, very quickly, tell us a little bit about the Torah Code movie that you have coming out.
Well, I know we don't have a lot of time here, and there's something that I'll just leave you with, something that Professor Ripp showed me. If any of you already know what the Torah Codes are, you may have heard about this professor called, his name is Eliyahu Rips, who's kind of given most of the credit for discovering the Torah Codes, even though it was kind of a collaborative effort. But if it hadn't been for Rips, I don't think that we would be to the point where we are today with the codes. But essentially, there is a code in the Torah. It's called an equidistant letter sequencing skip. So it's like if you count in every few spaces, you'll come up with a word in the book, and the computer can find those words and show it to you in what we call a table. Well, Professor Rips was really excited. I went to his house a couple months ago in Israel, and he showed me this table, and I didn't have the background on it at the time to know what it was he was showing me. But it was what he likes to try to find are tables that are in a complete sentence where it's more than just chance that this could just occur at random in some other text, some other Hebrew text. So he shows me this table, and it said the title of the table was The Watchmaker. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but back in the 1800s, having a little history lesson here, there was a guy who was a writer by the name of William Paley, and he wrote a book called Natural Theology. And in that book, he compared the universe to a watchmaker. That the whole thing tracked beautifully, that all of these various organisms that are on the earth were designed that way. So he was a real proponent for intelligent design. Well, in the 90s, Richard Dawkins, who is an atheist, wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker. And The Blind Watchmaker is a book basically just trying to disprove everything that William Paley said in his 1801 book. Even though he thought it was a well-written book, he just doesn't believe it because he's more into natural selection and Darwinian theory and all those things. And Richard Dawkins is an intelligent man, but that's what he believed. So Professor Rips thought he would do a table on the watchmaker, and in a complete sentence it says in Hebrew, the watchmaker, yes, I do exist. So it's almost like the encoder of the Torah kind of giving us a little message here, which I thought was really cool.
So the movie is your new documentary that's coming out is designed to explain the Torah code. Is that the purpose of the movie, or does it give examples of the Torah?
There's lots of examples of what we're finding in the Torah codes, modern day events that are encoded in the Torah, people's names, events, dates, places are in the Torah codes. And then we're also covering what's going on in Israel right now with Hamas and the rockets that are being fired and how people have to go into little makeshift bomb shelters to prevent getting blown up by a rocket. And I brought a couple pieces of Hamas missiles home with me from Israel that I have that I'm going to be showing in the film. So, these things are like what's going on over there. And if anyone's been following the news, they know that there were some terrorists that came into a synagogue in East Jerusalem just a couple of days ago and murdered 5 people. And they did it in such a bloodthirsty way that it's almost a little baffling because they went in there with meat cleavers and actually cut the people's bodies up.
So
and
you have
pools
found
of blood on the floor of the synagogue.
You have found a lot of these events within the Torah code, and the new movie talks about many of those modern events that are happening. And that
yes.
movie is coming out. That movie is coming out when?
Well, it's still in post-production. It should be out of post-production the first half of the month of December. Then it goes into replication. So it's going to be like in January before we'll actually have physical copies of it. And we're also looking into being able to stream it, too, for those who would like to do that. But it's going to be in high definition. It'll be a really cool film by the time we get it all done.
Wow. It sounds really...
And the people
really
that are in the film, just briefly, it's Professor Eliyahu Rips, who's basically the discoverer of the Torah code, Rabbi Glazerson, who's an expert in ancient Hebrew, Professor Robert Herelick from City University in New York, Art Levitt, who's a Torah code expert out of Jerusalem, and then Dr. Alexander Rotenberg, who wrote the software that they use to search the Torah called Soft Torah. So we've got kind of like the world experts in this film.
Wow. It's going to be one for the collection, I'm telling you. And I'm very much looking forward. So let's keep our eye out for that. Larry, we have about 6 minutes left, and with the remaining time, do me a favor. I'd like you to address the times in which we are living and how people can find peace even in the midst of all the crazy stuff that we are seeing. How do they do that?
Well, one of the ways is we just need to really. There's a Hebrew word that I'm sure most everybody's heard. Augusto says it a lot. I know Rick knows what it means. Is shalom, and this Hebrew word shalom, even though we say it means peace, it really is built on layers and layers of what it means, and it's hard to describe. Shalom covers so many areas of one's life, the world, the cosmos. I mean, it's just a massive, and it's one word, shalom, but it means so much. And I think that we need to try to walk closer with what the Word of God says and pray and study and really, you know, we were talking about the instance like the black-eyed children, et cetera. We're going to see more and more of this stuff. Rick's exactly right, and I've heard a lot of that happening over in England now. But the thing is, you know, we go back to where this show kind of started. You asked me a question about hearing God or whatever, and one of the things in any of those situations or circumstances, one thing that I personally want to hear is when I'm confronted with any type or manifestation of the enemy or whatever, I just want to hear what the Holy Spirit directs me to do, because you remember the Bible clearly says the Holy Spirit is our director. And so I trust God, I have faith in Him that in any instance I approach, and this has worked thus far over the years, the Holy Spirit will direct me in the exact word to speak or the thing to do and carry me through that situation. And I just have to lay that out there for other people to use if they like it. It's not really a formula, but it works.
Well, I have to agree with you, Larry.
Absolutely. And so what you've heard for the last 2 hours is a lot of talk about the supernatural invading our physical 3D world and how we deal with that, what we can expect in the near future, and how we can walk with peace in the middle of all that stuff. As a consequence, I hope that the Cutting Edge and my special guest Rick Shaw, who stood in at the last minute. Thank you so much, Rick, for stepping in.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's been an awesome time with you, and of course my good friend Larry Taylor, who is real, by the way, audience. Larry Taylor is real. He's not just a character in a book, but he's a real guy. But fellas, I think we've covered some broad ground today, and my hope is that, audience, you have gained a lot of insight to many things that you might not normally come across. So again, Rick, very quickly, can you give us the website information?
Sure, it's pinlight.com or endtodarkness.com.
Pinlight.com or endtodarkness.com. And Larry,
endtodarkness.com.
And Larry, if you can give out your website information.
Yes, it's LarryWTaylor.org. That's LarryWTaylor.org. And Rick, thanks so much for coming on. Man, I just enjoy talking to you so much and listening to you talk about the things you know.
Well, feelings mutual, Larry.
Both of you guys just blow my mind. I mean, you guys, both of you guys are just awesome to me, and I so much appreciate you guys being on today. Audience, I appreciate you being here and taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen and to listen to the show in the archive. My hope and my prayer for you is that as we walk in these days, at the end of the age, that the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will rest on your hearts and your minds, and that in spite of the craziness that is going on in our world today, that you can lean on that peace, that you can lean on Christ and not fear, because Jesus is real, and He is able to help us walk through those things regardless of what comes. So I hope that if nothing else, the crazy things we talked about today will help you to lean more heavily on Him. So with that said, I appreciate you all being here tonight. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Larry, for being on. Audience, you've been listening to The Cutting Edge. Be sure to tune in to Dorothy's other shows every day of the week. Augusto Perez on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Deb on Friday, and then her new show on Saturday. You've been listening to The Cutting Edge, and we thank you for listening. Good night, everyone.